A real problem that exists in League of Legends is defining this term mechanics. You hear it used all the time by all levels of players, from the pro down to the guy who's at the very bottom level, and people use it in such a wide way of applying it to all different types of players. And people will say a player who has good mechanics, who's just a challenger player, who's clearly not very good. Or they'll say this player has the best mechanics, he's just the best in his region, yet he clearly gets dominated in some skill respect by players from Korea, for example. And so part of the problem is, whenever you use language, the implicit kind of bias within the language is that, okay, at least when I say this, the other person understands what I'm talking about, what I mean. If the other person has a different lexicon, a different vocabulary, a different dictionary, when they look up that word in their mind, then I'm not conveying the thought that's in my mind through my mouth, through the small mouth noises and the vibrations on the air to them, and getting the same information to them. They're getting a different picture of what I mean. And so a problem I've noticed in League of Legends is that more so than any other esports game, it's beset by the difficulty of not being able to really define what does mechanics mean. I've gone and talked to lots of different pros, and they all have different variations on it. And I've listened to fans, and different fans mean different things. But these people never compare the dictionaries. They just assume that they assume everyone's meaning the same thing by mechanics, and then they just argue about whether their meaning of mechanics. They don't mention what it is, but they'll say, no, he has worse mechanics. What do you mean? How can you say he has worse mechanics? He has much better mechanics. If everyone stopped and compared the dictionaries there, they'd say, oh, right, that's because he means this by mechanics. Oh, well, of course that player doesn't have that. I would never said he does. Oh, well, what I mean by mechanics is this. So yeah, this player does have this. We would quickly get to a resolution on this. So first of all, let me outline the problem that League has compared to other games. So a great example here would be StarCraft. Now, my preferred StarCraft is Brood War, where mechanics was a lot more important, but I'll go with StarCraft 2 because it's a more modern example. People might know at least some of it. In StarCraft 2, we don't just use mechanics to describe the skill function of what you can do in game, like using your mechanics as in the physical aspects of your body. What we actually use mechanics for in StarCraft 2, it's usually separated like this. You have mechanics, and then you have APM. And so APM itself might even then be broken up into raw APM, actions per minute, how many actions you can do per minute, and then even the micro aspect of like micro actions, and can you do lots of them and fast and very precise. That also is a different factor. Raw mechanics in terms of StarCraft just tends to be actions which you must follow sort of one after the other. So it's a mechanical aspect of like this follows this, and must be strung together. And the faster you can string them together, obviously the more fluidly you can do it, and potentially the quicker you can do it. But in general, just getting them done together in a fluidish manner is considered the mechanical aspect. So you'd be like building units, go back to your base, build units, make buildings, mine resources, go over here, keep that running, manage roughly moving your army around. And then when you come into a battle, you have the micro and you have the APM of like how much of that can you do really fast, but then also how much can you micro your units over here. And these terms are all set up and split up, so we understand what we're talking about when we say mechanics here. And that's the problem in League. Those sorts of terms have all been conflated into this one term, mechanics, and it just means everything, or it means nothing, because it might mean one thing to one of those to one guy and one to another guy, and this guy thinks it just means that, and he thinks, well, I've never even considered it means that. And so all these terms just get bundled up into, there you go, mechanics. And obviously some people, English isn't their first language anyway, so they're just hearing the term, they have their own meaning. Part of the problem here is that because it's split up in StarCraft, particularly even in StarCraft 2, it means that we even say in StarCraft 2 that some players have great mechanics, have amazing mechanics, who actually don't have high APM. They don't have they can't click very quickly, very accurately everywhere. They don't have very high skill in that regard, but they have a skill for doing things fluidly, or the timing is very, very well done, or they can anticipate well and they do exactly this after the other, whereas some guy might be faster, but he might not be as fluid in there. So you could have better mechanics as a lower skilled player than a guy who has, in theory, incredible click rate or speed or whatever else. And so I'll give you some examples of that. In a player who has really good mechanics but low APM. So in Brood War, there was a player called Stork, one of the greatest players ever. He's not up there in terms of APM and in terms of raw precision click speed like that, but his actual mechanics were beautiful. They were so fluid. He was always on time. And so if you watched him play, you would never watch him play and watch again and go, I lost there because his micro wasn't good enough, or it wasn't mechanically good enough. His micro wasn't good enough, or he didn't have good enough APM. You'd never see that. You'd always see he lost because of some strategy, because he was always playing within his kind of range of what he could do. And it was always so fluid. And he was always on point with what he was doing. Likewise, in StarCraft 2, a great player is MMA. If you've ever watched MMA play, it amazed me the first time I saw it. His mouse movements were so slow, yet they were perfect. The precision, he wouldn't be like the guy who was all over the place. He would just move right to there and do that, and they'd move to here and do this, and they'd move to here and do this, and he just seems like he's playing a casual game. Do this, but in the game, he's doing everything he wants to. In fact, he's famous for drop play, which is in theory the mechanically micro-intensive sort of play. He was able to become a pioneer and actually be very, very successful, winning a lot of tournaments, something like 9 tournaments in his career with this style, because he had amazing mechanics, even though he didn't necessarily have insane APM or skill in that respect. Because we often think of skill in terms of like how fast can you do something, how accurately can you do it. You know, at what level of, I guess precision is accuracy in that sense. Now let's look at some players in StarCraft history who have both sick mechanics and very high APM, very amazing micro. Well, there are examples of that. Bisu, this guy he's like what I described of MMA there. Never missing anything, so precise and everything so fluid, except at the maximum speed you could ever get. If you watch him play, I've seen players, it almost turns them white, Protoss players, when they watch an FPVOD of Bisu, just everywhere, perfection. Likewise, Jaedong, perfect injects, in StarCraft 2 at least. He used to manage his lava amazingly in Brutal while also having the best micro and insane macro ability. Just an amazing, amazing player. So really, in League, I get the sense that a lot of people who are defining mechanics, and they're talking about players who clearly aren't very skilled in terms of like the raw physical mechanics and the raw like speed and accuracy. And these players who aren't that great, but they do have great mechanics in this context, the StarCraft context. What people are tending to say there when they're talking about in League is they're putting all these together and they're thinking like, okay, mechanics means skill shots, like how accurate are your skill shots overall, regardless of speed, or how, you know, just how often do you land them, what's your hit rate like, how fluidly do you combo spells, how do you combo spells, and what's your positioning like. These tend to be the things, and yet I would divide these up as I will later on. So because if you think about it, skill shots and positioning can actually be, you can make up for the gap. If you have incredible skill, like apparently Deft does, where people say in team fights, it's not that Deft knows exactly where something's going to come from. He just reacts. His mechanics are that sick. He can just instantly react and dodge this and get that and that. He's not predicting anything. Whereas an amazing other player at Kog'Maw, for example, you could be a very, very sick Kog'Maw player and just have amazing skill for timing and anticipation, and that's what these landing of skill shots and positioning can be. If you're a really cerebral player with very good intuitive sense, these can all be made. You can make up the gap versus the super mechanical player in that respect by just being great at anticipatory play, predictive play. I mean, a good example here would be Genja was really good at that. In team fights, his positioning was on point all the time, dodging and anticipating where they'll be and when to set off his. And you'd never notice that he didn't have insanely high skill level. And so likewise, let me use the same kind of categorization that I had before and go over into League and do the same thing. So first of all, we want players who aren't super, super fast and super amazing and like their raw skills are like, wow, what an athlete of the hands and the esports in that sense. Two great examples. I'll use all AD carries for this, okay, to make it simpler. So slow, but really good mechanics. Well, an obvious one right now is Sneaky. This guy's mechanics look perfect within this concept I'm talking about, the StarCraft 2 style of like just fluidity of putting these things together, like basic positioning or like not necessarily firing skill shots the faster, but landing them very well in abilities, comboing abilities. Sneaky's really good at that. He always plays within his range of what he's doing. And to me, the master of that was Genja, like I just mentioned. Genja had flawless mechanics. You would never see him get caught out in a way where it was like, oh, he was mechanically lost there. Because he knew exactly what he was doing in the limits of his skill set, and he would just play perfectly, beautifully within that. And it was like a well-oiled little machine that just ran along. Wonderful stuff. So let's go the same way. Now let's go for a player that has really good mechanics, just like those players we mentioned there, but then really sick skill, APM, micro, whatever you want to call it. Well, two obvious AD carries. First one, Double Lift. It's not a coincidence that he has all the highlight players. It's not just because he's an NA. Even on solo queue and all the rest of it. This is the guy, like the Deft guy I mentioned, where he can get caught out in a moment where he's not anticipating, he's not predicting, and he can just put together the perfect combo of abilities, but just like that, and at the maximum speed you can physically do in a mechanical, physical limitation aspect. He can just do it. Likewise, another player, another modern example, I'll go to a modern and an old one just like I did there, go Reckless. Mechanically, pretty much perfect. There's nothing you can really complain about there. Any faults in Reckless's game are to do with his mindset and how he approaches the game mentally and what he thinks of his role and what he should be doing right now. It's never to do with the skill. The skill is fantastic. So the reason why I bring this point up Yeah, we can just say all these great players have mechanics. But first of all, if we just say they all have great mechanics and we're using it in the conflated sense I said of all those different senses, not just the StarCraft type of meaning, the problem here is we're actually missing out now on a term to describe the incredible skill level of the micro, the APM, that sort of aspect that we don't talk about in League. But we need that because we need to differentiate between Sneaky and Genja, great mechanics, and Doublelift and Reckless, great mechanics and incredible skill level also. We need to differentiate between those two and also realise that we're actually also giving Genja and Sneaky credit for being anticipatory and predictive and being able to make up the gap between those players and sometimes beat them, despite in terms of raw skill perhaps being worse in this sense. The reason why we need to differentiate between them is because otherwise we end up in this nightmare world where, because we've said they have great mechanics, now Sneaky has great mechanics and so does Reckless. So how do I differentiate? If I'm just a new player and I hear that, I'd assume that they're both just the best physical and skill level you could be, but that's clearly not the case. Likewise, if someone says Lemonation actually, I actually don't think his raw skill is very good, but his brain for the game is so good. He's really good at predicting, and he's really good at not throwing out the combo unless he's going to land it perfectly on. That's why he gets those great support like the Black Shield onto them, the Thresh Hook. These are normally sick mechanics champions that people make the plays from and they just come out with, but he actually just does it from like a brain perspective side of things, using his mind to make up the gap. But we need to differentiate between Lemonation, Thresh and Morgana of Matter. There has to be a differentiation on even the mechanical level we have to describe there. Just like if we're talking about Sneaky before, yeah, I'm telling you, according to the StarCraft 2 definition, Sneaky definitely has sick mechanics. But if you talk about those mechanics, and you add all those factors in, you're going to get in a problem there because he has mechanics in a different sense. Like I say, using the brain to what another player like Uzi. If you watch the Uzi teamfight clips from Worlds, he's like, the slow-mo ones are incredible. He's like stutter stepping just past the range of a skill shot like that's fired. Then once he's just dodged it, he instantly takes a step back in to hit just at the limit of his range with the auto attack. He comes back out to dodge some CC. He cleanses once. He goes off. Like, it's unreal the stuff this guy's doing. Like, Sneaky is not doing that in team fights. Sneaky's much more of like just stay within a safe sort of range, stay near my support so you can give me the shield or whatever else. Make sure I'm a little bit out of their range, but then focusing a bit of my attack. It's in the realm of what Uziai's doing, but Uziai's doing it not only with the mental aspect there, but he's doing it on a raw physical level of his skill that he's imposing on the opponent to a degree that Sneaky just isn't even approaching. And so you really do have to differentiate between the two. Now, what is the solution here? Sadly, I'll have to preface this by saying there probably isn't one, because at this point in time, people watching this video isn't going to change everyone's mind and isn't going to cause a snowball that'll go through the whole League community and everyone will say, right, now we've defined mechanics, thanks for that. We'll have mechanics, and we'll have APM, we'll have micro, and we won't say that positioning is part of mechanics. And that's probably not going to happen. So in that sense, it's not really going to happen, actually. Most people aren't going to change how they talk about mechanics. I just want to make this point here so that people at least understand what I mean when I mean mechanics. And also how you're not dissing someone by saying they have bad mechanics if we're going to use skill into mechanics as well. If you're talking about in fact, sometimes you're giving people credit if you're talking about the other mechanics and saying they have good mechanics, but their skill isn't that insanely high compared to the best players in the whole world, like Uzi, Reckless, etc. Now then, another way we can do it, if in an ideal world we had control of this, would be to divide it up. So maybe we could divide it up into micro positioning mechanics, and we could use mechanics solely for fluidity, accuracy, with combos, comboing abilities, spells, maybe even like a little bit of positioning into making a skill shot or something. Like actions that have to be done in a sequence with some fluidity in an order, and if you fuck up one aspect of the order, then it won't necessarily work. There are ways we can at least intellectually start to take these things apart, disassemble, but then crucially put them back together again. That's like the alchemist's goal, the Solveig Coagula. Like, you take it apart, then the idea is you put it back together, and in doing so you understand how it works, why it works, what it is about it that works, that you don't just from taking it apart and go, well, I sort of understand that. No, you have to be able to put it back together better, even potentially. So it'd be nice if we could do that with this term mechanics. I don't know that we actually will, but I thought I'd just break it down here, because coming from other games, it's really weird to me that we have this divide where people are arguing over two different things, and if they really just listened, they'd know that actually they meant different things, and that we need better terms here, because historically, in different games, I had this problem in Counter-Strike. A lot of years, people didn't have very many good terms for the roles in Counter-Strike. We never used to talk about roles. We used to just say the guy who gets a lot of kills. And that was rubbish. We never had these terms like support player, believe it or not, in Counter-Strike for a long time. We never had players like the lurker, the guy who holds a position, or he tries to always be behind the enemy and backstab him. We never really had good terms for this. But once we got the terms, even the low-level player who's a new player or just not very skilled and doesn't have a high level of thinking about the game could now describe what he sees happening and break the game down and start to understand the game on a higher level. So I think the terms and the terminology and the language and the lexicon and the vocabulary we use in our dictionaries for the game is actually very important, because until we set that and we agree upon it, we can't even necessarily think about the game the same way. So just food for thought for everyone there.